Looking for something to read? Well, these are the books that I've written. Hop on down to the description to find the Amazon links for all 4 of them, and keep your eyes open for more in the future. With that said, on to the video. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Omni viewer, and yes, I decided to make another Ultraman Blazar video, partly because there's stuff about the series as a whole that I want to address, and partly because there's stuff in this episode in particular that I think is interesting. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned about the series that much is the English dub. Yes, I have seen the series in both English and Japanese, and both actually are very good performances. And yes, that includes the English dub. I know English dubs have a reputation, but this one's good. I mean, it's not perfect, but I say it's good because, one, all the voice actors are experienced, so you know that they're going to give good performances, and 2, the voices actually do sound like they match the characters. Like, you ever hear a dub or really any voice acting performance where the voice doesn't sound like it should be coming out of that character? I've seen plenty of those. This is not one of them. Now, that being said, there are some weird things it can result in. Like, this one in particular, I think, is going to result in a little bit of confusion. Because, well, how do you pronounce the monster's name? See, I ask that because in pretty much every source I've looked up, the official English spelling of the name for this monster is Dorgo. But in the dub, it's pronounced Dorugo. So they add that extra syllable in the middle. Does that mean that we pronounce it that way even though it's spelled another way? I mean, it's one of those tricky situations, and not one unfamiliar to the genre. This creature's name, for example, is spelled Destoroya, but it's pronounced Destroyer. So, yeah, I'm not sure what we're gonna settle on at this point, because the episode's brand spanking new, but I do think there's going to be some debate. Also, we find another one of those interesting instances in which a Japanese regional dialect / accent is equated to a particular American / English dialect accent, and it's an interesting choice. It's a common practice in dubs for certain accents from Japan that are clearly meant to be like region specific to be equated to an American accent of some sort, so as to get the point across as what the equivalent would be. For example, Kansai accents are most often equated to southern United States, sort of a good old boy from Texas kind of sound, like this. This episode, however, does something I honestly didn't expect. Specifically, this episode brings us to Henri's hometown, and when she meets her old childhood friend, she briefly slips into a way of speaking that her friend says makes her sound like her father, and they decide to go with a Midwestern American accent. She literally says, "It's not safe out here, don't you know?" You know, like she's one of those nice ladies from Minnesota. Definitely not something I've heard in an English dub before. And I've heard the English dub of Godzilla 2000, which was the first Godzilla movie to ever include Yiddish in its English dub. So, yeah. I'm not sure what to make of that. I don't know if that's the actual best option they could have gone with, but I mean, if you're watching it in English, I'm sure it gets the point across that this is sort of a very rural area, and being that Henri's character is now in an urbanized setting where she's part of a military unit, she might be trying to avoid accents like that, lest she be stereotyped. We don't really explore it that much in that episode, though. That's actually kind of a disappointment, really. We do get a sense that this region of Japan has a rich history. I mean, the fact that they have an ancient myth about a creature that actually is a mountain, that's pretty significant in its own right, but we don't really fully explore this idea of Henri not feeling like she really wants to be there. Because there's this sense of she doesn't want to talk about her hometown, she's not proud of where she's from, but that kinda gets swept under the rug. I'm not sure if it's going to come up again. There probably won't be much of an opportunity unless Dorgo/Dorogo comes back, which is possible because they don't kill him. But I don't know. Feels kind of like the episode wasn't really that interested in exploring its own central theme. But hey, what can you do? In place of that, of course, we have Dorgo/Dorugo/whatever he winds up being called. I'm just going to be going back and forth between the two if it's all the same to you guys. He is definitely interesting. Mountain kaiju are rare, as in kaiju that actually are mountains. It has been done before. In ssss.gridman, the anime, there is a monster that is literally a mountain. In fact, it's so big it might be several mountains. But that's also a Tsuburaya production, so I'm not going to say that Blazar stole the concept. If anything, it's recycling. And Dorgo is absolutely his own kind of creature. It's got an interesting design that actually looks like he's made of earth and grass and everything. And it's even more interesting that he rises up right beneath those rail guns that they were testing, and once he's awake, they become part of him. I don't know if there was supposed to be some sort of commentary there. If there is, I'm not entirely sure what it could possibly be. Like, yeah, mankind's actions affect the environment, but the effect is that they will take our guns and shoot them at us? I don't know. It was just a cool concept in all likelihood, and it works. Surprisingly enough, I don't know how he controls those things, but it does make him more of a threat. But he's also the first kaiju in Blazar to not be killed, as I mentioned earlier. He is in fact the first monster that is preserved. And there is a reason for it, of course, because he is part of the environment, he has an important history in this region, so you get the sense that he should be preserved. There is more to him than just a big destructive creature, and the only reason he's awake is because they were running tests there when they could have done something else. And it's interesting. There's always, I think, at least one monster in every Ultra series that the Ultras do not kill, but instead do everything they can to save. At least one. Sometimes there are more. I've got one up here, Shibozu, one of my favorites from the original Ultraman. And Dorgo now joins those ranks. But it's interesting that the reason is not entirely environmental. Like, yes, he is a creature made of literal earth, but the reason he comes back isn't because they're wrecking the environment, it's because they wrecked a shrine. The shrine that contains the statue that actually keeps him asleep. It was that which awoke him. So it's not fully an environmentalist message, at least not in the way you usually see it. It's an environmentalist message mixed with an historical message and a cultural message, and even, dare I say, a religious message. It's sort of lumping them all together and saying that respecting the environment, respecting history, respecting faith, respecting all those things, basically, you should treat it all as the same. Not like in a new age kind of way, but more just, don't just tear it all down because you think you've got something better to put up. You gotta respect the past, you've gotta respect the land. It's an interesting way of putting it. Again, it's not like it's hammering you over the head with that message, but it's a good way to deliver it, I think. It's a nice, subtle way to do it, as subtle as it can be when you have a literal mountain walking around shooting railguns. But ultimately, I think it works, and it makes sense that Dorgo would be preserved. The fact that he is preserved, though, also has me wondering if he'll come back at some point. Maybe as an ally? Who knows? Other monsters have gone from enemies to allies before, and I think he would be a prime candidate. Naturally, of course, there's also more of Earth Garen. And this is something I wanted to talk about that harkens back to the whole discussing the series in general that I alluded to earlier. Because I'm wondering what kind of mecha Earth Garen specifically is. When I say that, I mean that there are three types of mecha you generally see in Japanese media. There are your autonomous robots, that's the first variety, where they are not piloted, they operate basically on their own, even though they're usually still controlled by someone. Some examples would be the original Mechagodzilla, the original Mogera, Tetsujin 28, Giant Robo. You get the idea. They are robots that function on their own, they do not have a cockpit you can crawl into and start pushing buttons and pulling levers. You might still have something like a wristwatch or a control panel somewhere where you tell them what to do, but how they do it is something they do on their own. So, for all intents and purposes, they are actual robots. Then on the other side of that, you have the piloted mecha, which are basically people or animal-shaped vehicles. Those would be your Gundams, your Votoms, your Nightmares, things that basically are vehicles, just vehicles that are not shaped like the kind we usually see. But then there's this third variety that exists somewhere in between, where the mecha are piloted, it's true, but they also seem to have a bit of their own will, their own intelligence. Those would be things like the Big O, Super Robot Red Baron, and any number of machines from the Super Sentai series, depending on the interpretation. And I think Earth-Garen might fall into that third category. Obviously, he needs two pilots in order to function, but when we see him interacting with the monsters and the environment and Blazar, there are hints that he's kind of got his own intelligence. Like, he's been knocked out twice, and in both instances, his eyes go from having big round pupils in them to having spirals, and he sort of wobbles around a little before falling over, like he's actually dazed. Completely useless function if he's just a ship. And there was also that moment where he and Blazar first had their initial team up. After they defeat Leviera, there's this moment where Blazar's standing proud, having defeated the monster. Earth-Garen walks up beside him and then turns and roars like he's saying, "Yeah, we did a good job, right?" Again, it feels sort of like those elements are hinting that Earth-Garen might not just be a ship. He might be his own kind of machine, one that just so happens to have the control devices inside of him as opposed to outside of him. But again, I'm not sure. I don't know if that's going to be important later on. I don't know if that's even the intention. All I know is that I have my suspicions. Other than that, I mean, I don't have that much more to say, but again, it was a good episode. An interesting opponent in the form of Dorgo, or Dorugo, or Dogara, or Doggy Boy, or whatever the heck it winds up being called. Earth-Garen gets to shine, Blazar gets to shine. We get to know a little bit more about the human characters, but not necessarily that much. The plot kind of meanders, but ultimately it doesn't feel like a waste of time. So, a good episode. Not necessarily a great one, but a good one. Although there is another reason I decided to talk about this, because apparently the episode that's coming next is a recap episode, which you don't normally see happen this early in any kind of series. In fact, I'm amazed they're still making recap episodes at all. But we are also told that we'll be learning a bit more about the world in this one. So I figured I may as well cover all of my bases before getting to that. And we will see. Until then, though, I'm still enjoying this show, and if you're watching it, hey, feel free to share your thoughts on whether or not you're enjoying it, or maybe you're not. I hope you are, though, because I think it's fun. But anyway, now I'm just rambling, so I'll shut up. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. If you want to see us keep doing what we're doing, you might consider doing all the usual YouTube things, as well as hopping down to the description to find links to DeviantArt, Patreon, Twitter, and links for the different books in the Tales from the Omnivault universe. Your support is naturally appreciated. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.